Welcome to True Reddit Reads. Today I'm going to share a story that isn't about ghosts or supernatural forces, but something far scarier, a relationship that seemed romantic at first, only to spiral into a never-ending nightmare. It started with sweet messages, little gestures of care, but slowly the boundaries began to blur. Control disguised itself as love. Silence was framed as respect. And before you know it, you're no longer yourself. This is the story of a woman, her journey from trust and love to fighting tooth and nail for her freedom from the man she once thought was her destiny. A story of manipulation, obsession, stalking, and ultimately standing up. If you've ever doubted that nagging feeling that something's not right, today's story might just be the confirmation you've been waiting for. Chapter 1: The Midnight Call. I'll never forget that night. A sweltering June evening, the ceiling fan creaking overhead, and I was curled up in my blanket, utterly drained after a long day. Then my phone rang. At first I thought about ignoring it. Who calls at 2 a.m.? But the sound kept going, persistent, almost urgent, as if something critical was happening. I stretched, picked up the phone. No name appeared, just an unfamiliar string of numbers. My instincts screamed that I shouldn't answer, but I pressed the button anyway. "Don't go to your parents' house." The voice froze me in place. It wasn't anyone I knew, but it whispered urgent, almost choked with emotion. Before I could respond, the call ended. I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. My heart raced uncontrollably. I jumped up, went to the bathroom, and splashed cold water on my face. I told myself it was probably just some drunk prank or a wrong number. But a part of me knew it wasn't a joke. The next morning, I called my dad. Everything seemed normal. He laughed, asked about work, shared a few trivial stories. I didn't mention the call. I just wanted to believe I had imagined it. But that evening, my mom texted me, "Can you come home and visit this weekend?" I typed sure and hit send. But my mind was flooded with questions. Why now? Why would someone warn me not to go? I didn't realize it then, but at that very moment I had stepped into a terrifying game, a game where the one pulling the strings didn't want me to survive. Chapter 2: The Red Flag I Didn't Want to See. At first I thought my parents just needed more time. They were always a bit hard to please. I figured if Sarah stayed patient, they'd eventually warm up to her. I even told her that just give them time, babe. But I was wrong. The signs came early, like the engagement party for my cousin. My mom told me it was just a small family get-together, nothing big, just us. But when we got there, it was a full-on event. Over 100 guests, a 3-tier cake, live music, and a damn photographer. Guess who wasn't invited, Sarah? Then came the family's annual charity gala. My father's pride and joy. He treats it like some royal ball where social status is measured in tax-deductible donations. I assumed, of course, Sarah would be on the guest list after all, we were married by then. But no. When I asked my mom, she blinked and said, "Oh, I must have forgotten to add her name." Forgotten. She remembered to send invites to people she only knew through other donors, but she forgot my wife. Sarah didn't say anything. She smiled. She even helped me pick out a tie for the night, even though she wasn't going. That night, I looked around the ballroom surrounded by people who had no real place in our lives and realized the person who did belong wasn't allowed. But the worst was my grandfather's 90th birthday. Our entire extended family flew in. My siblings, uncles, cousins. And again, Sarah wasn't invited. That time she cried. Not loudly, not dramatically, just a quiet cry in the kitchen as she stirred a pot of soup, like her tears didn't even deserve full volume. I asked my mother, why would you exclude her again? She sipped her tea and said, "Some people just don't belong, dear." And I refused to pretend otherwise for appearances. I was stunned. Sarah had never done anything wrong to them. She was kind, intelligent, soft-spoken. She respected our traditions even when she didn't understand them. And yet, she was always the outsider. It hit me like a brick. My parents didn't dislike her. They resented her. because she didn't fit into their perfect image of what a wife should be for their only son. She wasn't from a respectable enough family. She wasn't from the right culture. And maybe worst of all, she wasn't pliable. Sarah had a backbone. She didn't suck up. She didn't grovel. And that to them was rebellion. I told them I wouldn't attend another family event without my wife. My mother smirked and said, "You'll come. You always do." And I did, at least for a while longer. Because the truth is, when you're raised in a family that equates obedience with love, standing up for someone else feels like betrayal. And I wasn't ready yet to betray the people who raised me, even if they were betraying me first. But Sarah, she never said a word against them, never asked me to choose. She just kept showing up quietly, patiently, until one day she didn't. Chapter 3: The Call That Changed Everything. I'll never forget that night. It was 2:41 a.m., the kind of silence that feels too heavy. You know, the kind that makes you feel like something's about to happen. I was lying in bed, just staring at the ceiling, sleep nowhere in sight. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A message from her. "Are you awake?" My heart skipped. It had been weeks since she blocked me. Weeks since she screamed that I ruined everything. And now she texts me. In the middle of the night, I replied, "Yes. Is everything okay?" 3 dots. Then nothing. For 10 minutes. I was about to put the phone down when it rang. Not a text. A call. Her name flashing on the screen. I answered instantly, but it wasn't her voice I heard. It was someone else. A man. Calm, slow. "She's not okay." My blood froze. "Who is this?" I demanded. He ignored me. "You said you loved her, right? Then listen carefully." What followed was a whisper. I couldn't make it out entirely. Something about a warehouse, a key, and "don't be late." I asked again who he was. The line went dead. I sat there, phone in hand, heart pounding like it wanted out of my chest. I debated calling the cops, or maybe her parents, but something told me no one else could handle this but me. So I threw on my coat, grabbed my keys, and left the house. The warehouse he mentioned, I had a guess. Back when we were still together, we used to pass this old abandoned printing warehouse near the river. She said it gave her the creeps. That's where I went. And sure enough, a single light was on inside. The giant sliding doors creaked as I pushed them open. My breath caught when I saw her. She was sitting on the floor, tied up, eyes wide with terror, a cloth gag in her mouth. I ran toward her, but a shadow stepped out from behind a column. The same voice. "You came." Chapter 4: Why Are You Still Alive? I couldn't stop hearing that sentence echoing in my head. Why are you still alive? It wasn't a question. It was a sentence, a verdict. After that night, I wasn't myself anymore. Everything changed. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I just lay there in a small rented room with cold white walls and a heavy weight pressing on my chest. The only friend who still kept in touch was Min. He didn't know what had happened. He just saw me suddenly disappear from school, from the city, from everything. I only sent one line, "Don't look for me." And he understood. I lived in hiding for a year. No social media, no news, no friends. I worked at a small bakery at night, cleaned in the early morning, and vanished during the day like a ghost. I didn't laugh anymore. I didn't feel anything. There was only existence. Until one day, I happened to see a post on Facebook shared in an old school group. It was a photo of Lynn, the one who had pushed me off the embankment that night. She was having a wedding, smiling brightly arm in arm with a stranger wearing a pristine white dress. Below were hundreds of congratulations. I wanted to throw up. She was living happily, and I couldn't sleep at night, haunted by nightmares of footsteps and the look in her eyes when she watched me fall. Why are you still alive? I knew what I had to do. Not for revenge, but so I wouldn't be a victim anymore. I hired a lawyer. I started documenting everything from high school journals, old messages saved on my computer statements from Min, and even my former homeroom teacher. I filed a lawsuit, attempted murder. The whole school was shaken. She pretended to be innocent. We were just joking. I didn't mean to. She slipped on her own. I was far too familiar with those excuses, but this time I didn't stay silent. I stood in court, trembling, choking back tears, and I told everything. I spoke about the years of isolation, the despair I was pushed into, and that night I almost died just because I wasn't like them. And when I finished, the courtroom went silent. She was sentenced to 6 years in prison. Not long, but long enough for me to sleep a full night for the first time in years. When I stepped out of the court, I took a deep breath. The air was still cold, but for the first time, I felt alive, not just existing, not a victim. I was a survivor. Chapter 5. The last message. I still keep that old phone. Cracked screen, worn out battery, but I couldn't bring myself to delete the last message from my mom. It was simple, daughter, I'm sorry. That's it. No explanation, no blame, no pleading for forgiveness, just an apology. I received it at 2 a.m. on a night I couldn't sleep because of the obsession, the memories. Maybe somewhere my mom couldn't sleep either. When I read that message, I cried. Not out of anger, not out of sadness, but because for the first time, I saw my mother as a human being, not the controller, not the monster from my memories, but a tired, lonely, scared woman. I didn't reply to that message, not because I hated her, but because I didn't know what to say. I'm 30 now. I live in another city with my own job, my own friends, and a cat named Latte, the first cat in my life, whose feeding schedule I don't have to report to anyone. I still see a therapist every month. I'm learning to distinguish between true love and control disguised as affection. I'm learning to forgive, not to justify what my mom did, but to free myself from the past. Recently, I went back to the old house. It had been sold. The new family had repainted the walls, planted flowers in the front yard, and the laughter of children echoed in the backyard. I stood there for a while, then walked away. No tears, no looking back. Because finally I realized one thing: I no longer live in my mother's shadow. I am myself, with every scar, every dream, and every right to happiness. Chapter 6. The Final Plan. I knew this day would come, sooner or later. I just didn't expect it to arrive on a peaceful morning like this. Bella and I were walking in the park near our home, her favorite spot. The sun had just risen, light filtering through trees, still heavy with morning mist, and for the first time in weeks, Bella walked without limping. I thought maybe we were starting to heal. I had put the plan on hold for a few days, spending time with Bella, focusing on ordinary things. Part of it was because I thought I was about to win. The rest was because I was exhausted. I let my guard down, and they knew it. I had just turned a corner near the public restrooms when I saw Marcus step out from behind a brick wall. No uniform, no authority, just a tired man, eyes wide with panic. He said nothing. He simply held out a phone. On the screen were photos of me holding Bella earlier. He'd taken them from a distance. Then he swiped to another one taken in front of my house. A man wearing a beanie standing in the shadows. Marcus whispered, "They know. They're coming." A wave of cold ran down my spine. The nightmare I had always feared was happening. "I have proof," Marcus said. "I don't know who you are, but you're facing something you can't even imagine." I didn't have time to be afraid. I stuffed a piece of paper into my pocket, a stamped internal memo, part of the evidence I needed. That night, Bella and I didn't go home. I rented a small inn in the next town. From a payphone, I called someone I thought I'd never reach, again my brother, the one who had cut ties with me after I started this line of work. "I need help. I'm being watched. I have evidence of supervisors manipulating files covering up child abuse." Silence. Then he said, "Send me everything. Tonight. And don't stay in one place too long. I didn't know how much I could trust him, Zai, but I had no one else. In the few hours that followed, I gathered everything I had: photos, audio recordings, blurry videos, anonymous letters Marcus had handed me. I sent it all through an anonymous drive. My brother promised he would pass it to an investigative journalist. I sat in the darkness, Bella resting her head on my lap. Outside, there were cars, voices, laughter of people who knew nothing, and I was preparing for the final battle. I knew if I lost, I would disappear. No one would find me, no one would remember me, but if I won, it wouldn't just mean freedom for me, it would mean justice for the children who had been forgotten, and for people like Marcus, brave but crushed by a system that wanted to silence them. And I swore I would not let them win. Chapter 7. I am no longer the controlled child. I didn't go back home after that court session. Truthfully, home had never really been home. It was just a place where I was monitored 24/7, taught to stay silent, and forced to smile through the pain. I moved into a small apartment far from the city. It was old, the walls cracked, the air conditioner sounded like a truck, but it was the first place I could truly breathe. I bought a new phone, a new number. No mother, no relatives, only people I chose. I cut my hair, not the kind that suits your face as my mother had dictated, but the kind I chose. For the first time looking into the mirror, I saw myself not a copy someone else had created. I started therapy. The first thing I told my psychologist was, I'm not even sure I really know who I am. She didn't judge. She just said, then we'll find out together. I wrote a lot about the meals my mother forced me to eat, even when I was sick. About the time she told me that anger was ugly, so I learned to swallow it. About the way she made me feel guilty for thinking differently than her. And about that final message, the one that shattered the illusion of unconditional love completely. With every page, I felt like I was reclaiming a piece of memory that had been warped. Gradually, the voices in my head, the voice of my mother, started to fade. One morning, I received a letter from Aunt Mai, the only relative who had stood by me during the trial. She wrote, "You are not wrong. You are strong. If you ever need a place to go, my home always has a room for you." And a big warm hug. I cried for an hour after reading it. Not from pain, but because for the first time I believed I was worthy of love without conditions. I didn't forgive my mother. Not out of hatred, but because I didn't need to. Forgiveness isn't a duty. Healing is the goal. She still called a few times, leaving long, rambling messages. I didn't respond. I was no longer the child whose life was controlled with keys. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. I chose to live, not just exist. Chapter 8. The Missing Piece. I didn't know what I was expecting. Maybe an apology, maybe denial. But what I didn't anticipate was acknowledgement. When I faced my father in that living room, the place where all the painful memories came rushing back, he didn't flinch. He looked at me and said, "I know you figured it out." I froze. My heart pounded so hard I couldn't hear what he said next. I just stood there like a child exposed raw and unprotected. "I couldn't stop her," he said, "but I couldn't walk away either. I was too cowardly." It was the first time I had ever seen my father cry, the man who once taught me to tie my shoes to spell my name, now trembled as if he were the child being hurt. He told me he had tried to take me away, called lawyers, filed petitions, but everything was controlled by my mother. She threatened to kill herself. "If you took me," he whispered. I didn't know how to respond. Part of me felt compassion for him. Another part wanted to scream. "What about me?" I asked. "Did you ever think about protecting me, no matter what?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I thought I had time." Those words made my blood boil. Time I had spent nearly 20 years in that gilded cage. Nearly 20 years not knowing what freedom was, not knowing what real love felt like. And he thought he still had time, while I had already lost my entire childhood. But then he handed me a box. "I've kept this All this time, he said, voice choked. Inside were letters never sent, copies of rejected divorce filings, photographs of me as a child cut from family photos my mother forbade him to keep. I opened each one, read every line, and for the first time I felt his pain. Not everyone standing outside is heartless. Sometimes they're victims too, just a different kind of victim. I didn't forgive him, not yet at least, but I understood him, and that was a beginning. I left that house that day with the box in my hands. It was heavy, not physically, but with the weight of emotions it carried. I returned to my new apartment, the first place where I could freely choose every tile, every curtain. I placed the box on the table, sat down, and exhaled deeply. I was no longer the controlled child. I was an adult, and I was learning how to forgive, not because they deserved it, but because I deserved relief. Chapter: The reflection behind the mirror. I started sleeping less. Not because I was afraid, but because I feared I was getting used to it, used to always being watched, used to the shadow in the mirror, the shadow I wasn't even sure was me anymore. That night, while washing my face in the bathroom, I saw it again. I looked up, and this time it didn't mimic me. I froze. My heart raced uncontrollably. The shadow was still watching me. Its gaze was haunting, as if it knew I was pretending, knew I was trying to be strong. I stepped back, eyes locked on the mirror. Then a slight movement out of the corner of my eye. I turned. Nothing. When I looked back at the mirror, my reflection had returned to normal. I stood there trembling, trying to calm myself. I'm just tired. I'm imagining things, I whispered, but I didn't believe myself anymore. I began placing a small camera on the bathroom shelf, pointing directly at the mirror. It recorded all night, and the next morning, I watched it. I wish I hadn't. At 3:47 a.m., my reflection in the mirror turned its head to look behind, but I outside the mirror was still slumped over the sink asleep. The shadow stood up, tilted its head looking straight into the lens, and it smiled. I fell back in my chair, dropping my phone. That night, I didn't dare enter the bathroom again. I only washed my face in the kitchen using the small mirror on the table. And even then, I could feel something standing behind me every time I looked up. I no longer believed this was just post-traumatic stress. This was something else. The mirror no longer reflected me. It reflected what I was about to become if I didn't do something. And that is the whole story. A long journey not just to escape a person, but to find my way back to myself. You can be manipulated, controlled, pushed into fear, but you can also stand up, break free, and walk out of that cycle. I know not everyone is as lucky as I was, but if you're listening to these words, remember this. You are not crazy. You are not weak. And you have the right to say, enough. He once told me no one would believe me, but now millions are hearing me tell the truth. If this story moved, you hit like, share, and subscribe to True Reddit Reads so you won't miss the next real-life stories where the truth is told through the voices of those who have been silent for too long. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. And remember, those who try to control will always fear the ones brave enough to speak the truth.